Right now I'm standing in front of Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee. Last night was rocked by a bomb blast. The Tennessee Bureau of Identification, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, state fire marshals are investigating this blast. Here's Walter Bearden of the Tennessee Bureau of Identification. Walter, what do your investigations show so far?
Well, we come up with a few clues, a few pieces of fuse, and of course we're still in the preliminary stage of the investigation at this time. And we will stay with it until we do come up with something.
At 4:22 a.m. on October 5th, 1958, the residents of Clinton, Tennessee were awakened by the sound of 3 strong blasts. Clinton High School, which was located in the middle of the small town, was nearly destroyed. Investigators would determine that approximately 150 sticks of dynamite had been placed in 3 specific locations throughout the school. Although nearly everyone in this small southern town was shocked by the bombing, no one was surprised. The fuse which led to the dynamite had been lit more than 2 years earlier, when Clinton High School became the first court-ordered integrated public high school in the South. This is a story of courage and determination, of reconciliation and resolve. The story of a community that stood shoulder to shoulder to uphold the law. This is the story of 12 black teenagers who faced the best and the worst in all of us. This is the story of the Clinton 12. Soon after the end of the Civil War, predominantly white southern towns began to see an increase in the number of their black residents. And Clinton, Tennessee was a typical small southern town. By the 1950s, approximately 10% of Clinton's population of 4,000 was black. Although most of the black families lived in one section of town, which was common throughout the South, they were still an integral part of community life.
Well, I tell you one thing, growing up in Clinton, it was really nice, you know. Before 1956, it definitely was a peaceful little town. And anybody who came here would have loved it because everybody, the blacks and white, got along good.
Oh, it was fun. You know, we all get together and during the summer times and play out in the school ground, baseball, and just going to the movies on Saturdays after we finish our work at home.
Oh, Clinton it was nice, you know, everybody got along good. And, you know, we'd come down on Sundays and play football.
We really didn't have any problems with getting along, and of course there wasn't a lot of actually socializing with the blacks or this sort of thing, but they were just black folks that was part of our community.
Clinton was a little softer when it came to bigotry, and you sort of knew. It's kind of like I tell my friends now in California. I say what you knew about the South was you were either liked or even loved, or you were disliked and hated, and you always knew where you stood. For the most part, it was a good place. My memories are fairly pleasant.
Although life in Clinton was fairly pleasant, Southern traditions were strong, and racism was commonplace.
Everything was practically separate. Of course, they came to town and did their shopping, and that sort of thing, and use some of the facilities in town, like the theater, the ball field, whatever. But it was completely separate.
When you lived in the South during those days, it was something that you already knew and accepted. You didn't necessarily like it, but that's how things were. Like when you went to the movies, for example, you knew you had to sit in the balcony, or there were places that you could not go. You knew you had to sit in the back of the bus. You know, you didn't like any of those things, but that's how it was.
I didn't go downtown too much. We wasn't hardly allowed down there that much, you know, certain places.
We just couldn't go and sit down with them and eat with them. And when we went to the theater, down the Rich Theater, they went downstairs and we had to go upstairs. And then when we went to Hoskins Drugstore, we couldn't sit in the booths and eat like they could, but we could go in there and order, but we couldn't sit down at the time.
We used to go into Hoskins to get candy bars, and we'd buy our candy, and we'd have to go back outside. So it was that kind of thing, you know? But no, it wasn't, I couldn't say it was ugly. I'm sure there were people who were ugly and called us names and things, but that was very infrequently.
Throughout the South, the practice of providing separate schools for black students was commonplace. In Clinton, the Green McAdoo School was the community's black school. Students attended Green McAdoo through the 8th grade. They were then bused to Knoxville to attend junior high and high school.
After we graduated from Green McAdoo there in the 8th grade, we had to attend Vine Junior High School there in Knoxville. And then after our freshman year, then we would go over to Austin High for our our sophomore, junior, and senior year.
Only our problem was we just had to get up in the morning and travel by 18 miles to school, and then we had to catch the school buses, and then we had to transfer over there and then transfer back.
Most of the students who were bused to Knoxville lived within a few hundred yards of Clinton High School. The 18-mile ride to Knoxville every day was inconvenient, and with bad weather, sometimes hazardous. Also, prior to 1951, families from Clinton had to pay tuition for their children to attend the Knoxville schools.
The babies of the family were triplets. And see, my mother thought about that. By the time that they got age to go to school, there would have been 5 of us brothers and sisters in school at one time. And my mother and father wasn't able to pay. It was a hardship paying tuition for 2. So they wouldn't have been able to pay for 5. And my mother thought about this. So she started working to integrate. So she filed a suit against Anderson County for us to go to Clinton High School.
With support from the NAACP, the lawsuit McSwain versus the Board of Education of Anderson County, Tennessee, was filed December 5, 1950. The suit demanded that the Anderson County Board of Education allow black students to attend Clinton High School. Most residents of Clinton's black community supported the lawsuit.
We had a high school right here. Why shouldn't we be allowed to go there? And so when it happened, I guess my feeling was, yeah, we need to push, we need to make this happen, because, it should be our school too. It's our town, we live here, we work here, we pay our taxes here. So that was kind of in my own mind.
The lawsuit was scheduled to be heard February 13, 1952, in U.S. District Court in Knoxville, with Federal Judge Robert Taylor presiding. Austin High School, the school in Knoxville to which the black students were bused, was arguably equal, with better facilities and a broader curriculum than Clinton High School. On May 19, 1952, Judge Taylor ruled in favor of Anderson County, keeping the doctrine of separate but equal in force in the Anderson County school system. 1 month later, on June 13, McSwain appealed the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, Ohio. However, the court decided to wait on a ruling which was in consideration by the U.S. Supreme Court. the Supreme Court was hearing the now famous lawsuit, Brown versus the Board of Education. On May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the current law of separate but equal was unconstitutional. The decision resulted in the beginning of the end of segregation in schools throughout the United States. 1 year later, on May 31st, 1955, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals entered a decree requiring Clinton High School to admit black students. On January 4th, 1956, Judge Robert Taylor ordered the end of segregation at Clinton High School.
It is the opinion of this court that desegregation as to high school students in that county should be effected by a definite date, and that a reasonable date should be fixed as one not later than the beginning of the fall term of the present year of 1956.
The summer of 1956 was a typical break from school for most of Clinton High School's 800 students. Ball games, summer jobs, camps, and vacations filled the months between May and August. However, school administrators, teachers, and parents held a series of meetings to help prepare everyone for the coming school year. Also, the 12 black students who would attend Clinton High School in the fall began to think about their transition from an all-black school to an all-white school.
I realized that I would not be going back to Austin High for my senior year, and I would be going to Clinton. I didn't think there would be any problems because I had not foreseen any sign there would be any problem. Just be another year that I would have to attend. I knew I was going to be leaving my friends that I had acquired there for those 3 years, would not be going to the prom, and I just had to make an adjustment.
I didn't really want to go to school there. I didn't, not because of integration. I just wanted to go back with my friends I had met the year before.
When they told us we were gonna be going to, all white school, to be integrated, it didn't set good because, honestly, true, I preferred to stay where I were at Austin, all black, a dominant black school, but I didn't have any choice. They had passed a law, and we didn't have no other alternative.
I didn't want to go, really. But they say, this is a chance for you, take it. And that's what I tried to do.
Can you imagine being a teenager in 1956? You've always lived a certain way. There was segregation and everything in the South, and then all of a sudden, you're being forced to go to an all-white school.
It was kind of like exciting at one end and a little scary at the other end because we didn't really know what was going to happen. We didn't know how we were going to be treated. We didn't know if we were going to be accepted or if things were going to be ugly. We just didn't know.
Many residents of Clinton didn't necessarily agree that their school should be integrated, but most felt an obligation to uphold the new law.
And we do not feel that if we allow or teach our citizens to disobey this law, that they are learning the right principles of citizenship. In other words, if they can do that, they can violate any other law or any other decision of the country.
However, the decision to abide by the law of the land was made from two distinct perspectives. Most of the white community felt that the end of segregation in their schools was a legal issue mandated by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Now, Clinton is a small community, a neatly run little town. We like to look at ourselves and characterize ourselves as good, decent people with a community characterized by fairness and civility. In short, our sense of decency had never addressed segregation, and suddenly we had to. And that in face of the conditioning that we were affected by and having grown up in a segregated system. So the editor of the newspaper, ministers in the church, and so forth, more or less promoted the attitude and the idea that you may not like desegregation, but it's now the law of the land, and we're a decent, law-abiding community, and we're going to abide by the law of the land.
The black community in Clinton took integration personally and felt that it was not only a legal issue, but also a moral issue.
Again, the whites believed in upholding the law. When segregation was the law of the land, they believed in upholding that and felt like to disobey that law was to commit a crime. And but once the Brown versus Board decision was handed down and once Judge Taylor ruled locally, they believed that it was their responsibility to uphold that law. That was their perspective. And at the same time, the African American perspective was quite different. It was all about equality in education. And you have to understand the circumstances of the families. There were African American parents that had a number of children, and they could not afford to send their children out of town to go to school when they would pass the school right down the hill from where they lived. So their fight was a fight to get equal education, which they felt like they deserved, and they did deserve. So there were two totally different perspectives.
However, many in Clinton held on to their beliefs that blacks had no place in a school alongside their children. One organization in particular was opposed to the integration of Clinton High School. Although in the past the group had stayed in the shadows, the upcoming integration battle inspired its members to take a more public stand.
And I asked my father what was the Ku Klux Klan. And he explained it to me that it was white people that didn't want the black people to advance into the world. Like there were certain places that we could go and certain places that we couldn't.
During the decades prior to the Civil Rights Movement, the Ku Klux Klan thrived throughout the South. Their reign of terror increased as the federal government began to provide equal status for blacks and other minorities. Although this secret society stayed mostly hidden in the shadows of darkness and deceit, many of their members were active in community life. This was true in Clinton. During the daylight hours, they were your neighbors and friends. But under the cover of darkness, they became a vigilante force whose mission was to terrorize and destroy the spirits of those with whom they disagreed.
I went over there and they all had their hoods on and talking about how their hatred toward the blacks. And even though they had hoods on, you could tell, I would catch once in a while a familiar voice or something, and I knew these were not all outsiders. There was some people in Clinton that was part of that group.
By the end of the summer of 1956, the town of Clinton and the teachers and administrators at Clinton High School thought they had prepared for the end of segregation in its schools. Yet they would soon discover that nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Monday, August 20th, 1956, was registration day for all 800 Clinton High School students. That morning, 12 black teenagers entered Clinton High School for the first time. Segregation in Anderson County schools had finally come to an end.
That first day was fine. We all went and done what we had to do, and no one said anything. I mean, it was a lot of looks, you know, it's oh gosh, this is something different, but there weren't any really problems that first day because we all just registered and went home.
The way I was raised, the only difference between me and anyone else was merely my color. You know, everything else was the same. My insides, you know, I was smart, as good looking as the next kid, you know.
Classes at Clinton High School began 1 week later, on Monday, August 27th. But before classes began, Clinton had a visitor. Franklin John Casper told townspeople that he was from Washington, D.C., and had come to town to help keep the blacks out of the all-white school. The people of Clinton would soon find out that Caspar ran a bookstore in Washington, D.C., where he had organized the Seaboard White Citizens Council. Caspar was a clean-cut, 27-year-old educated young man. A graduate of Columbia University in New York City, Caspar had embraced the teachings of anti-Semitic intellectual Ezra Pound. Indicted for treason by the U.S. government, Pound was not imprisoned, but committed to a psychiatric hospital in Washington, D.C., where he was found to be insane. Caspar, who thought of himself as an intellectual, like his idol Ezra Pound, traveled the South preaching his doctrine of hate and bigotry.
The argument simply does not hold that the white race, being a majority in the United States, should turn over to a group of people only removed from slavery 80 years and only removed from the jungle by a few hundred years. Turn over to them the control of our entire civilization. The basis of common law is the custom of the people, and if the custom of the people in Anderson County is to keep the races separate, then the Supreme Court law doesn't mean anything. In 11 years, in every southern state, the segregation laws we are fighting for today were written, every one of them, by the Ku Klux Klan, which saved the South.
Upon arriving in Clinton, Caspar went door to door, asking the residents to join him in establishing the Anderson County White Citizens Council in order to fight the end of segregation.
And I wanted to find out how the folks felt about it. I didn't think they were for it, but I didn't tell them anything about that. I just went door to door. I showed them a picture of a nigger soldiers kissing some white girls. You've probably all seen that picture. Army in the Fort McClellan, Alabama. Some say it's Germany. It doesn't make any difference. There's still niggers in American Army uniforms kissing white girls. Doesn't make any difference whether it's Germany or Alabama. It's being done. It's wrong. Now, I showed them the picture, and I asked them if they knew about the niggers going into school the next day, and they said they knew about it, or they heard something about it, or they didn't hear about it. Some of them hadn't even heard about it. I asked them how they felt about that, and they said, I'm against it.
However, many of Clinton's residents rejected Caspar. When Caspar asked Joe Millsaps to join him, the Clinton High School senior reportedly laughed in Caspar's face. He said he was not going to school to fall in love with the Negroes, but to get an education.
Our school starts at the 1st of September, and all through the month of August, of course, we knew we would have Negro students in school with us when we started, but no one said too much about it, and no one seemed opposed to it violently. And then, I believe it was the Saturday before the Monday that school started, this Caspar came into town, and he started calling people up and stopping them on streets and trying to form pickets in front of the school for Monday morning.
He was able to get about 5 people to come carry pickets to protest the desegregation at Clinton High School that Monday morning. And there were only about 5 or 10 people there protesting. And they left within 15 minutes or so because it was sort of an unnatural activity for them. But in the meantime, of course, there were hundreds of media here. Newspaper reporters, magazine reporters, Life and Time, and TV reporters, NBC, CBS, ABC. So all of those people had their pictures taken, and that afternoon in the newspapers and that night on the nightly news nationwide, the lead story was about this great protest at Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee. And of course, we're protest. What are you talking about, you know?
Due to the national publicity, Caspar's rallying cry for segregation resulted in the gradual influx of like-minded individuals. In addition to those who opposed integration in Clinton, the town began to fill up with reporters and television crews from around the world. This quiet little town was about to become the reluctant focus of the civil rights movement in America.
And then the next morning, there were about 50. And by Thursday morning, and this is all in the same week, there were about 500 people there protesting and carrying pickets. And as you go to school, you'd get spit at and cursed at and called names, nigger lover and so forth. And that was for the white kids. Imagine the tension and the pressure for the black high school students who were coming down the hill to Clinton High School.
Most of the Clinton 12, as they came to be known, lived in a neighborhood behind the high school called Foley Hill. As the number of segregationists grew larger and became more brazen, the students would meet at the top of the hill and walk as a group to school. Once they crossed over the train tracks, their town seemed like a different world.
The worst part was when we crossed the tracks, and as we came close to the school, you know, there's more people on both sides of the street shouting, you know, names, you know, calling us names and stuff. So we came on down and did what we had to do with school.
As a group, we walked down the hill, down toward the school, and the moment we came inside of the school, there was like a wall of people on one side of the street and a wall on the other. And the minute, you know, we were in sight, the name calling started, and it was scary. It was very scary.
But then on the next day when more people came and the young boys started walking with signs, I began to wonder and think, well, maybe they're not going to accept us like I thought they were. And on Wednesday morning, I almost cried to go back home because there were so many people, and they looked so mean. They looked like they just wanted to grab us and throw us out. They didn't want us at all. I could just see the hate in their hearts.
Yeah, you definitely was scared. You definitely was scared, because you didn't know where you going to get to go back up on that hill or not. You come off the hill, but you didn't know what kind of day you going to have.
Yeah, it was scary, because, you know, we didn't know what to expect. But we didn't expect what we run into, you know. But we just had to, we dealt with it the best we could.
I didn't want them to think I was too afraid, but I was afraid. But I didn't want to show that fear. Because the more fear you show, there will probably be more problems.
Although the pickets ended at the front door of the high school, many of the white students had to decide how they felt about having black students in their school.
I didn't ask for integration, and I wasn't enthusiastic about getting it, but the Supreme Court said that our high school should be integrated, and so I thought that I should do all I could to bring this court order about peacefully.
We were kids 15, 16, 17 years old, and our ability to analyze legal and moral issues was obviously still in a very developmental stage. But number one, we knew very soon after school started that we were in the middle of a nationally historic, important event. We knew that we had pride in ourselves and pride in our community. And, you know, we wanted to present ourselves with that pride as a predicate. At the same time, we had to sort of overcome or deal with the conditioning that we'd had all our lives growing up in a segregated system.
Then when we got in our classrooms, you know, things went in better in the school. They were throwing spitballs, and you would think the teacher would try to stop them, but, you know, they didn't, and that made it sort of hard, too. Then, you know, you couldn't really, it's hard to try to study, you know, when somebody calling you sniggering this and black this and nigger this, you know, it was just pretty hard.
After the first week, the school inside with the kids, it wasn't no problem there. It was the people the older people that lived down there. They were always trying to rush to schools and get in and get to us, just kill us. The police would have to go out the back doors and put us in the police cars and take us up there. Then they wanted, the Caucasian people wanted to come up in the neighborhoods and do all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, and you was on the edge all the time.
Not only were students and school faculty targeted for harassment, but members of the town's black community were also threatened, harassed, and attacked by the Ku Klux Klan.
Another thing that I can remember quite vividly was the Ku Klux Klan driving through our town and drove again through the black neighborhood. And on that particular night, my father was jailed because he stood in his front yard and he had a gun in his hand.
and they came across the hill, and they didn't stop. It just came across the hill with their capes and their masks and stuff on, hoods on and everything. They went on through. They didn't stop, nothing like that, because they say, we was loaded for the bear. And the white people would want to try to get a marching thing together and come up in the woods to try to destroy us. So we had to go buy guns. You're sitting up there trying to be okay and ain't got nothing to fight with.
My father and several of the guys had their guns. They were waiting for them guys to come across that railroad track, and it would have been war. And of course, most likely the poor black guys, they probably would have lost. You know what I'm saying? But they were going to defend their homes and their children.
As a precursor of things to come, a dynamite blast rocked the houses located in the black section of town. Though no one was seriously injured, the blast shattered windows and hopes for a peaceful outcome.
The Ku Klux Klan set dynamite right down the hill from where I live. It blew out the windows of our house. And it just let's have it. There wasn't anyone hurt. And my mother and my grandmother was an invalid, and she couldn't walk. My mother was afraid that she would get hurt, killed. So they set another explosion off. This time it was up the hill right in front of our house.
On a number of nights, the local church in the neighborhood, Mount Sinai Baptist Church, became a safe haven for the black community.
The African Americans were very protective of their turf, so to speak. While the women and children were staying in Mount Sinai in the basement and sleeping there, the men were guarding that area, and had someone come up to cause problems, there probably would have been a death.
They had sent word for all the women and the children. We had to leave home and go to Mount Sinai Baptist Church and stay there, because they had word that they were coming through, going, to hurt us. And men folks couldn't sleep at night. They were up watching, and we were just really nervous.
In addition to the black community, teachers and school administrators became victims of the volatile atmosphere in the town.
I was just a little nervous, about things, because people began talking and going on, and I know I drove my car down there with my two girls, and we would wait in the afternoon. We wouldn't immediately leave school. We'd wait till everything was clear before we'd get out of there, because we were nervous.
A lot of the children were frightened too, but a lot of kids were real nice when we first started, but then later they were frightened,
The teachers, I think they were very helpful and resourceful. I didn't see any sign of resentment from my teachers. I can't speak for all, but the one that I encountered, I didn't see any resentment. They were very cordial to me and respectful, and they would call on me if need be. So I didn't see any resentment from the instructors there.
Because I felt like that the principal, he had a lot on him, and the teachers had a lot on them. Most of them were nice. Nobody was saying much. Nobody was saying much of anything.
While teachers and students were trying to keep things as normal as possible within the walls of the school, events in the town were beginning to escalate. Casper was soon joined by a white supremacist from Alabama named Asa Carter. During the day, Casper and Carter were recruiting townspeople to join their cause, and each night they would hold rallies on the outskirts of town.
Casper was charismatic in a sense, Asa Carter even more so. And they would have their rallies out in the country at night, and they would burn a cross, and they'd have their speeches about those 9 justices in the Supreme Court don't tell us the law of the land. The will of the people is the law of the land, and we don't want immigration. We don't want those niggers in that school. sort of appeal.
Our failure to date has been failing to attack at every level and continuously. Well, we in the White Citizens Council say now, yesterday, today, and forever, as long as there is one living white man in the United States, the Supreme Court is not the law of the land. That decision is not the law of the land now, or it never will be.
This day and age, I would imagine that he would be considered a terrorist because of his ability to stir up trouble and stir up people to believe the wrong idea and take action for the wrong reasons.
When John Casper got involved and things really got ugly, you know, it was ugly enough before he came. But when he came, it was just intolerable. And of course, we were very fearful.
As Casper's popularity and influence grew in Clinton, many of the town began to choose sides on the integration issue.
And I really believe that the majority of the people who lived in Clinton, whether they wanted the school to be integrated or not, they didn't want any of that Casper stuff. You know, there were a few who joined him, but I think the majority of the community they were just appalled by that whole incident.
Yet others wondered about Casper's real intentions in Clinton.
I think he was paid to come into town. He could have cared less about 12 little black kids going to school. He could have cared less. He really could. I have been as close to him as this table and looked him straight in the eye and said, yes, I'm still here. I didn't say anything to him. He looked at me in the eye and I looked at him on the street, you know, and right down there by Hoskins drugstore. He passed me on the street. I passed him, looked him straight in the eye, and it was to say, yes, I'm still here.
By Friday, August 31st, Casper and Carter had gathered significant momentum in their effort to disrupt daily life in Clinton. Literally thousands of segregationists came to Clinton from throughout the South and across the country to join Casper's forces. Also, coverage of the events was being broadcast nightly on every major television network throughout the world. Newspapers and magazines throughout the country were publishing details of the integration struggle in Clinton. As the crowds began to grow out of control, the town was on the edge of violence. Since it was Labor Day weekend, and Clinton was the main thoroughfare between North and South, an unusual amount of traffic was traveling through the town.
This town was covered up with cars from all over the South, Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina and Georgia. Back then, we didn't have Interstate 75. The main north-south route from Chicago, Detroit to Miami was right down Main Street, Clinton. So with all this traffic and all this confusion and all these people, the local police force, which I think at that time was about 6 men, just couldn't handle the traffic and the crowds and the protests and the not rioting yet, but near rioting. So the mayor organized a home guard composed of just everyday citizens, plant workers and lawyers, the football coach, who armed themselves and performed security duties. In other words, there were several people, leaders whose homes had been threatened with bombing and who'd received telephone threats. So that home guard had 2 or 3 people at the homes of these people that had been threatened. The rest of the home guard was trying to help the police keep the traffic moving through town. And it was an ugly situation.
And the mayor puts out a call to any able-bodied man to come in and help restore peace and order. 40 men show up, most of them former veterans, all of them community activists. They gather out there on the lawn, gather out there on the lawn of the courthouse. They've got tear gas and I understand a few Thompson machine guns from the Knox County Sheriff's Office.
I stopped by Everett Llewellyn's home and asked him if there was anything as a citizen that I could do. Buford, his son, was there, and they both said, yes, you can help us become a member of the Home Guard that will augment the Clinton City Police. I wasn't thrilled, but I had offered, so I agreed. There were 40 of us. And as I recall, most of them were servicemen, either a few World War I and the rest of us in World War II. Buford swore us in as members, auxiliary members essentially of the Clinton Police Force. And then we were asked if we had any weapons. And I happened to have my service .45. And so they suggested that we all go home and get what we had available, which I did. And we assembled again in the late afternoon at the courthouse in Clinton.
Adding to the frenzied atmosphere in Clinton on this Friday night, the high school had its first home football game of the season. More than 1,500 people were gathered in the town square, along with many others who were coming to town for the football game. The atmosphere was explosive, and many feared that at any moment this normally peaceful little town would erupt with violence.
More throngs of people up here in the main town square, ranting and raving and listening to Casper and Carter. And there was a rumor that they were going to come down to the high school football field and at halftime of the game burn a cross in the middle of the field. That didn't happen, but that's the type of tension and rumors that were going on, and certainly had credibility given the attitude and the demeanor of this mob that was up here in the main town square.
We had a football game on Friday night, and the teachers had to take turns, you know, selling tickets. Well, I was on that night. I was on duty that night with several other people. And after we collected all of this money, we had to take it to the bank. And that's when there was about 1,500 people over around the courthouse and in front of Hoskins drugstore. And this man was there making speeches, and well, it was like a riot. And they were getting the cars coming through town. They were turning the cars over, and every car that had a colored person in it, they were getting them out and beating them up. And it was just awful. We didn't know how we was gonna get through, but we had to go to the bank. And I was really scared.
Eventually, after the football game had ended and the crowds around the courthouse began to disperse, the streets of Clinton were quiet once again. Fortunately, the boiling pot of hatred and bigotry had reduced to simmer. However, with the coming daylight of Saturday morning, it began to heat up again. In spite of the attempts by local law enforcement, it would boil over by sundown. In an effort to stop the momentum that began earlier in the week, Clinton authorities obtained a court order forbidding interference with the integration of Clinton High School. Casper was arrested and taken to Knoxville to await sentencing. On Friday, federal judge Robert Taylor found Casper guilty of violating the court order. He sentenced Casper to 1 year in jail, but Casper appealed. His supporters raised the necessary $10,000 bail to free him while his appeal was pending. But what Casper had begun only 1 week earlier was now coming to a boiling point. On Saturday night, September 1st, 1956, an estimated 3,000 protesters, demonstrators, and onlookers crowded the streets around the Anderson County Courthouse.
By Saturday night, it had gotten so bad that the Home Guard literally had to line up in a phalanx and clear the mob out of the courthouse square and threw tear gas. And it was precisely at that moment the mob itself was saying, let's regroup and let's attack them. Let's take their guns and kill those digger lovers.
Essentially what we said, try to keep people moving, try to keep them from congregating in groups. And that was about the only what we try. Buford had tear gas. So we went out onto the streets and tried to keep people moving, quite unsuccessfully. We were so greatly outnumbered that we finally were essentially being pushed back by the crowd. I understand that one of our people understood that in being pushed back, The reaction of the crowd was, let's kill the bastards. And we knew we were in trouble.
By now, news of the escalation in Clinton had made its way to the state capitol in Nashville. Governor Frank Clement had to make a decision about how to handle the integration crisis in his state. One day earlier, Clement attended a lunch meeting at the Junior Chamber of Commerce in downtown Nashville.
When he got to our meeting, he said, here's the speech I was going to give, and put it down, and then started speaking from the heart. Frank gave a sermon to us. He says, Tennessee is a law-abiding state. No one is going to stand in the courthouse door or the schoolhouse door to obstruct integration. It's the law of the land. It's been declared our constitutional law, and we're going to obey the law. In the morning, I'm going to send the National Guard to Clinton, Tennessee, because it's the first school to integrate, and there's a lot of people coming from out of state and out of town to cause trouble, and I'm sending in the National Guard. It is going to be an unpopular decision, but I'm going to do it. I need your support. And he gave this speech in such a passionate way. I say this was a young Republican businessman's club, really, but that group would have gotten their knife and fork and marched to Clinton with him if he had wanted us to.
By Saturday, Governor Clement did call out the Tennessee National Guard. They couldn't mobilize in time to quell the mob that had taken over the streets. So he ordered the Tennessee State Patrol to immediately bring order to the town.
You could hear them downtown hooping and hollering and jeering. And we could see over in the South Clinton, and then all of a sudden I saw one red light, and I saw two. Then next thing I know, there were just numbers of cars coming, state troopers, and I kind of felt real good because I felt that that was a solace for us, and there would not be any confrontation between us and the people downtown. And that's one of the most beautiful sights that I do remember, about seeing those state troopers coming into the city.
And about 100 highway patrol cars came over that river bridge from Knoxville down Main Street in Clinton, circled the town courthouse square, and parked the lead car in front of the drugstore across from the front of the courthouse. And the guy who was head of the highway patrol at that time, I'm told, well, I know he was Greg O'Rear, but he was about 6'8". And of course, he came out of his patrol car sort of in sections and finally stood up to his full height, threw that shotgun over his shoulder and looked down at that mob and said, boys, it's all over. And it was.
And the situation, as soon as their arrival, thank God, began to simmer down. And we stayed around for another hour or two, doing nothing essentially except watching the crowd and being insulted to a great extent. I tell you what, I've flown 26 missions out of the Mediterranean, and I have never been more frightened in my life than I was that night in Clinton.
The next morning, while many of Clinton's residents were attending church services, their lives were disrupted once again. Only this time, the disruption was generally welcomed.
We were just having normal church service because everything was, by morning, everything was pretty clear. And we had to come across town to go up on the hill to our church. Well, like I say, we were in church, and all of a sudden, we hear this rumble. It's a boom, boom, boom. And of course, if anybody's ever heard tanks, you know, they make all this racket. And just then, somebody says, that's tanks coming into town.
600 members of the Tennessee National Guard put Clinton under martial law for the next 2 weeks. Once the Guardsmen arrived in town, John Casper left Clinton. It seemed the integration crisis was over, or at least under control for the time being. 2 months later, Casper returned to Clinton to face local charges of sedition and inciting to riot. His trial began November 5th in the Anderson County Courthouse.
They brought him back into town in November to try him on those charges. And it was about a 1-week trial with a lot of witnesses and a lot of haranguing and demagoguery from the defense counsel.
During the trial, Casper lectured the judge and the jury on monetary theory and constitutional law. It was later discovered that 4 members of the jury were admitted segregationists, and prosecution evidence disappeared during the trial. It took the jury 2 ballots in less than 1 hour to find Casper not guilty of the charges.
And of course, the courtroom was packed and his supporters were cheering and so forth. And overnight, we had a mob again.
When Casper came back to town, his trial was not the only item on his agenda.
He realized that to be effective, he needed to, from a public relations standpoint, he needed to start some trouble inside the school. So he organized a junior White Citizens Council as an adjunct to the White Citizens Council that he'd organized in that first week of school.
The Junior White Citizens Council consisted of 10 to 20 students who were instructed to disrupt life inside the schools.
It was not until the acquittal of Casper in our local criminal court and the organization of the youth council that we began to have a breakdown within the school.
They was out jeering, you know, throwing things, and just really a terrible experience.
I still have a few notes that were left in my locker. And one of them, you know, said, "Go home, nigger, we don't want you here." I had my hair pulled a lot. My hair was very long at that time, and I got it yanked quite a few times.
It was rough. I used to go to my locker, all my books was all stuck together, eggs, syrup, you name it, they had it in there. Couldn't even use my books or anything.
I had long hair back in the day, and I had kept a ponytail all the time. That ponytail would be yanked. My head would, whoop, you know, and then but when you turn around, nobody knowed anything.
And if you were in your locker, the big tall boys, they would kind of go across your head like they were really going to hit you. And of course you'd jump, you know, and then everybody would laugh.
They would step on my heels. They would take the back of the front of their shoe and step on the back of my heels. And my heels would literally bleed.
In an effort to maintain order within the high school, Principal D.J. Britton made an unusual request of some of his students. He recruited members of the football team to patrol the school's hallways and classrooms.
If my Uncle DJ said it once, he said it a half dozen times to me. Anytime Jerry's name would come up, he would say, you know, during those tough days in 1956, if it hadn't been for Jerry Shattuck and his leadership role with the student body, I don't know that Clinton would have ever survived those days. It was Jerry Shattuck when a junior White Citizens Council group got started within the school. He was Jerry Shattuck was captain of the football team, and my Uncle DJ called him to his office and said, look, there's a group of white students harassing black students in the school, and I want you to organize the football team and keep the peace in the school. And Jerry went out and did it, and they kept on every corner there was 2 or 3 ball players, and they kept the peace in the school.
While the football team was trying to keep the peace within the high school, Casper's followers were once again accelerating their program of intimidation and terror.
I guess my life was threatened 10 or 12 times by anonymous telephone callers who would all hang it up. I have since had my phone number changed 4 times to keep from getting these annoying calls. I received letters, many through the mail. I received 2 today, one of which was an unsigned letter, of course, which said that they felt that I was a low-down person and used other vile names and felt that someone should throw acid in my face or in the face of someone in my family, and that I wasn't fit to live. My wife and I, since the opening of school, are always careful when we go home. We study the premises.
When we get in, we lock the doors and get the lights on. Any noise or any sound that occurs, we are always concerned at what it is. There have been some nights when we have felt that it was the only safe thing for us to do was to stay out of town. We have visited our friends at times. It is just a constant thing which I'm sure that is part of the organization to wear myself and my wife down. It just presses you down every day, lower and lower. And to me, it is an amazing thing that an American citizen living in the United States has to be subjected to this, while the lawless citizens, those who refuse to abide or accept the law, continue to run free.
By the end of November, racial tension in the town was at an all-time high. The upcoming municipal election was scheduled for early December, and the town's White Citizens Council had its own list of candidates on the ballot. Also, harassment of the Clinton 12 was gradually increasing outside as well as inside the high school. December 5th, 1956, was Election Day in Clinton. The town was energized with anticipation of the election results, as well as on edge due to the prospect of violence. Early that morning, Reverend Paul Turner, pastor of the Clinton First Baptist Church, decided to escort the black students down Foley Hill and into the school. He was accompanied by local attorney Sidney Davis and another citizen, Leo Burnett. Reverend Turner and the other community leaders were concerned for the safety of the students, especially on this particular day.
Before Paul left the house that morning to go to the office, I knew he had made a phone call, which I later learned was to the pastor of the black church, to tell him that he would walk with the children if they wanted to go to school that day.
His stance was very courageous, and it was an example to the people, not only in his church, but all the people of Clinton, when he said, you know, we're going to stand up for the right thing, and things are getting out of hand, and I'm going to walk up there, and I'm going to walk with these students to give them a certain amount of security as they go to that school.
I think he looked at his community and could not believe what he was seeing. I don't think he could believe the hatred that he was actually, seeing, and he just couldn't quite deal with that. And so he got out there and said, I have to do something about it.
He wasn't seeking any publicity or anything other than he just wanted, it was his community, it was our community, it was our home, and they had accepted us, and he felt some responsibilities as one of the leaders in the town.
After Reverend Turner escorted the black students to the school, he headed back to his church, just a couple of blocks away.
About 300 yards away from the high school, we were far away from where the policemen were doing their duty, of course, in front of the high school. One of the Citizens Council members had stationed himself with about 3 other men on a corner. As I made my way to that corner, they jumped me. I retreated across the street, Broad Street of Clinton, trying to keep him at arm's length, while the other fellows were trying to surround me and to hold my arms and to get me stationary for the beating.
It was a horrible thing, and I thought they were actually killing him. Blood was streaming down his face, and even it just looked that blood was running out of his eyes. I asked someone in the group, just anyone, to help him, and when there was no response, I went to him and tried to assist him by pulling some of the men's arms from around his face. And all the time, the men in this group who were standing around were screaming, "Kill him." And that's exactly what I thought they were going to do.
When the phone rang, and I got to the telephone, And the voice that I heard was saying, "They're killing him, they're killing him." And I didn't know what she was talking about.
Reverend Turner eventually freed himself, and the police arrested several of his attackers. However, the damage had been done. Turner's blood could be found on the side of one of the cars parked along the street.
Irvin took the phone and he said, "Everything's all right, Jane, everything's okay." And I said, "Well, bring him home, bring him home." Well, before he brought him home, he took him by the doctor's office to have the wounds treated, mostly his nose and face.
Within minutes after the assault on Reverend Turner, several members of the mob attempted to break into the high school. They were intercepted by the home economics teacher, who happened to be Principal D.J. Britton's wife. The mob began to attack Mrs. Britton, but the fight was broken up by a student who chased the intruders out of the school.
But that incident hit so close to home for the principal that he ordered the school to be closed, sent word to Knoxville and Judge Taylor, the federal district judge, that he needed help to secure the safety of Clinton High School and close the school down.
As word of the attacks on Reverend Turner and Mrs. Britton raced through the county, many of Clinton's residents saw this as an assault not only on two of his leaders, but on the entire town. They had an opportunity to let their voices be heard on this election day. By afternoon, throngs of people crowded the polling places to soundly defeat all of the candidates supported by the Clinton White Citizens Council.
It backfired on them. It didn't pan out the way they thought it should have. You attack one of the prominent ministers there in the city, not only prominent, you know, a well-known Caucasian there in the city. And in a way, I hate that it happened, but you know, sometimes things happen for the good, and it was unfortunate that Reverend Turner had gotten beaten. But I guess he probably looked at it from the standpoint, it did do some good in terms of it brought a little more people concerned about what was happening there in Clinton before someone was maybe actually killed. And so that was a turning point.
I think this is largely due to the attack on Paul Turner the other day, was that many of us had stood by unwilling to stand up for integration, and yet also unwilling to violate the law. And when Paul Turner was attacked, the feeling of the community was more or less solidified. No mere words could have done it. It took some kind of action, heroic action, something of this beating that was administered to Paul Turner to bring us to the point where we were willing to stand up and say, now, we are not going to put up with being pushed around anymore. We believe in law and order, and that's what we want, and that's what we're going to have.
4 days after Reverend Turner was beaten, he stood in his pulpit before a standing room only crowd.
Of course, the church was packed, and there was some question in a lot of people's mind as to whether or not he would preach. Well, you couldn't have kept him from preaching. He was determined that he was going to preach that Sunday.
He delivered a message of hope and reconciliation to the people of Clinton.
The Bible is without precedent as a book, and I personally have no fear that it will ever be superseded. But many have tried to misuse the Bible, trying to justify some low standard of conduct by the very Bible that they profess to love, and by the book that never compromises with sin, with pride, with prejudice, or with hate. Billy Graham tells the following story. Shortly after the Civil War, in a very fashionable church in Richmond, Virginia, there entered a Negro man one Sunday morning when communion was being served. He walked down the aisle and took his place at the altar to partake of the elements of the Lord's Supper. There was a rustle of anger that swept through the congregation. Sensing this delicate situation, a distinguished gentleman stood up, and walking down the aisle, he took his place by his colored brother. Immediately, his magnificent example swept over the spirits of the rest of the people in that congregation, and they followed him to the altar, taking their place there too. This man was none other than Robert E. Lee. My friends, we have been too far away from God. When mobs are able in our land to flout the law, the tragic result is a Cicero, Illinois, or a Phoenix City, Alabama. Here in Clinton, we are not especially against integration. We are not especially against segregation, but we are positively and definitely against the disintegration of our community and our body politic that we cherish above all things, realizing that where anarchy prevails, none of us has anything of any value and none of us has any freedoms anymore.
Well, that took the issue to another level, beyond legal into the moral area. And, you know, through the years, I think all of us have grown to accept not only the legal, but the moral rationality and justification of desegregation.
As a result of the violence on Election Day, federal marshals came to Clinton and arrested 16 people, including John Casper. Several were later sentenced to prison by federal Judge Taylor for violating his desegregation order. Clinton High School remained closed for the remainder of the week, but reopened the following Monday, December 10th. In May 1957, Bobby Cain, one of the Clinton 12, graduated from Clinton High School. Cain was the first black graduate of a court-ordered integrated school in the South. What should have been a proud day for Cain became an unforgettable memory.
Well, I was glad. I was glad when I found out that I had passed all requirements prior to graduation. That was a historical day for me. I remember going to Ms. Ralston restaurant at that time, and I was just thankful that I had passed and was getting ready for graduation. But at the graduation, I was just glad, and I told my father to be sure just to come around and get me immediately after commencement exercise. He was a little late, and then I had a confrontation with a group of young men, and they told me that they were coming in to get me and beat me up, and I was asking, well, why is it that we just can't fight one at a time? Not knowing what the real intent was, but what they were doing was lining me up. And all of a sudden the lights went out, and just so happened, one of my classmates walked in front of me, I guess when they threw the punch, and I heard someone say, "Oh." I think they thought they had hit me, and they cut the light back on and realized they had hit one of the classmates. The light went off again, and this time they did catch me with a punch, and then I did start swinging wildly when the lights came on and people were scattering. The lights went back off, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to know what I should do, so I hit the floor. And then they cut the lights back on, and at that time, I think teachers started coming, etc., and my father came, and then I just finally turned my cap and gown in and left. But I was totally upset at that time, and when I got home, they had to kind of curtail my reaction because I ran in and got the shotgun. I was going to shoot anybody that had come through the neighborhood that was white, and they wrestled the shotgun away from me, which I'm glad at this point that they did, because I was just upset because I had been hit. I thought I had been done some injustice, and I was just going to try to take care of anyone that I saw at that time. But they talked to me and got me quieting down, but I was really upset after that.
During the next year and a half, more black children became students at Clinton High School. However, the White Citizens Council thrived, and segregationists in Clinton planned one more brazen act to keep blacks from attending the school. On Sunday morning, October 5th, 1958, Clinton High School was nearly destroyed by dynamite. Investigators estimated that more than 150 sticks of dynamite were used to bomb the school.
That Sunday morning, you know, we'd heard about it, and we came to town and walked around the school. And it made me mad. It's hard for me to talk about it. But we don't know who did it. I really don't even know why they did it. Because it accomplished nothing but destroying an excellent school. And it had just been remodeled. We had a new laboratory put in. Several things had just been done to it before we were to enter school that year. But, you know, we had to change plans, and the whole school suffered from it. You know, it wasn't that the blacks suffered. Every kid in the school suffered.
Well, my room was one of the rooms that was bombed, and it was right on the front there where the students went in. It was to the left of when you went in. And I remember that some of the students we had home rooms, you know. And I remember some of the students, they had given me a beautiful bouquet of flowers. And I had them on my desk. And you know, I worried about that. I worried about those flowers. I wondered if they were destroyed. Of course, I couldn't get in to see about it. But it just broke our heart because we just couldn't believe that they had done that to our school.
As news of the bombing spread across the country, school administrators had to find a new home for the high school students. The city of Oak Ridge was located just 10 miles from Clinton. Oak Ridge was a federal reservation that during the Manhattan Project had produced enriched uranium for the world's first atomic bomb. During World War II, the federal government had built all types of facilities for the town of more than 75,000 people. However, after the war, many Oak Ridge residents had moved away. Fortunately for Clinton, the Atomic Energy Commission, which ran Oak Ridge, had a vacant elementary school, which they offered as a temporary home for the Clinton High School students and staff.
They found an abandoned elementary school in Oak Ridge, which had to be cleaned and painted and furnished and equipped. Students, people from Oak Ridge, people from Clinton, people from all over the county went down there to work on that effort.
There was about 900 students now, and we had buses. We had a parade of buses with all of those students and teachers. The teachers also went on the buses.
When they arrived at Oak Ridge, little side note here again, you know, Oak Ridge were our bitter rivals in football and basketball and so forth. We beat them about once every decade. But at any rate, there was the Oak Ridge High School band, 8 o'clock in the morning, full uniform and formation. And the Oak Ridge High Band plays the Clinton High School alma mater. As the Clinton High School students get off the bus, black and white, and re-enter their new school.
The Clinton High School students used the building at Linden Elementary School in Oak Ridge for the next 2 years. Clinton High School was eventually rebuilt through private donations, monies from the county, and through national figures who lent their support to the rebuilding of the school. Drew Pearson, a well-known newspaper columnist, wrote about the events in Clinton and encouraged his readers to make donations to the school building project. Also in December of 1958, evangelist Reverend Billy Graham conducted a 5-day crusade in the Clinton High School gymnasium, the only remaining portion of the bombed-out school building. More than 5,000 people attended the event, and Reverend Graham's crusade once again put Clinton in the national spotlight. The events in Clinton, the integration in 1956, and the bombing of the school in 1958 have made an indelible mark on the memories of those involved. Some didn't want to remember, yet others had to find a way to deal with the emotional turmoil caused by the events.
My mother died in '99. So it's probably only been it was probably only 2 years before she passed away that I ever heard it mentioned in my house. And the reason why, as far as I can remember, and the reason why it was mentioned then is I was looking in some papers that she had, and the Cleveland Dealer, or Plains Dealer, Cleveland, Ohio newspaper, had done an article because they had been in Ohio the summer before the integration of Clinton High School, and they had did an article, and she had talked to them. And I read the article, and I said, And she said, what is that? And I told her what it was. I said, what was that like? She said, Marilyn, she said, it wasn't pretty. She said, but it happened, and we survived it. And that's the only thing I've ever heard her say about that.
I did not tell my children about any of this. They didn't know anything about much of it until I started getting interviewed and asked a lot of questions. And my nephews, they were all just shocked, They were just shocked, especially the younger ones, Because by the time my children went to school, it was better, not good, but it was much better. They played football, they were in all the activities.
We are also resentful. Your senior year in high school is supposed to be one of the best years of your life, right? And here, we have this type of activity going on.
At first I was extremely angry, but then I realized I couldn't continue with that angriness.
That night they bombed that school. I did not go back the next day. That was it for me.
I have no hard feelings of what happened. It only helped me to teach my children not to be prejudiced. Because we all are one race, and that is the human race. Only difference, skin complexion may be different, but we all are one race of people. And I teach my children not to be prejudiced, because there's good and bad in every race.
We were mighty lucky not to get anybody hurt, no worse than they were, with just a few fights and that sort of thing. I've seen some things that really scared me.
No, you won't forget nothing like that. Nope. It was the experience.
I did have a hate in my heart. I had that in me too, because it took me a long time to get it, for it to leave me,
The key words during the time when we were going through all this were separate but equal. And things were separate, but they were never equal.
However, some of those who were intimately involved in the Clinton integration struggle never fully recovered.
There's hundreds of other sub-stories relating to individual experiences that the black students had, individual experiences that the white students had, teachers whose homes were threatened with bombing, teachers who had crosses burned in their yard, the principal who on many nights didn't feel safe to stay in his own home. He stayed with friends or stayed at a motel and shifted his location every night because he was getting continual phone calls threatening his life or threatening his home or threatening his wife.
My great uncle was D.J. Britton, who was principal of the school in 1956 and endured a lot of the hardships. Endured more hardships than any man should have had to endure.
It carried over to the end of his life. And I would wake up in the night and he would be reacting,
The effects of the Clinton integration struggle took its toll on many involved in the events. Yet today, 50 years later, the story of Clinton, Tennessee is being told to honor those who fought for the first court-ordered integration of a public school in the South. The old green McAdoo Elementary School has been converted into a museum to tell future generations of the struggles and successes of this important story. The people of Clinton have embraced their past in order to secure their future as a town that embodies the ideas of tolerance, equality, and the American spirit.
The people were just remarkable 50 years ago, and it's because of that we were able to get through that period of history without the notoriety that some of the other towns in the South got.
It's a very dramatic story. And the irony of it, this was the first desegregation in the South as a result of Brown versus Board of Education and a court order. It's a success story. As ugly as it was, you know, the victory is even greater because that high school remained desegregated from the first day to the present day, despite that mob violence of that first week, despite what happened in that one day in December of '56, despite the high school being bombed. You know, this community stood together in a united way and made the court order a success.
This gives us an opportunity to share the real lives of these 12 courageous individuals that walked down a hill to go to school to abide by the law. And the other side of that story is it gives us a side that our community, a city, a small town, come together to say, yes, we will protect you and we will help you and we will put you in an environment that you can feel safe and that you can have the opportunity to have the same things and enjoy the same things that we have.
I went back and received the Wall of Fame that one of the dignitaries recommended me for, and I couldn't believe I was out on the 50-yard line accepting this award. And what really got me after I accepted the award, the people stood. And I looked around, I said, this is unbelievable. I thought maybe once they'd given me the award, you know, it might be a few applause, and that was it. But the people stood, and I was just flabbergasted. And that was probably one of my highlights of seeing that and receiving that award.
We got to learn how to live together. We got to learn how to work together because it ain't no alternative now. You ain't got no choice. You got to learn how to work with each other.
Much of the footage that we see of the civil rights movement, you see civil rights leaders with bodyguards and that type of thing. Man, those kids didn't have anything but themselves and courage and the support of their families. And I can't put myself in their shoes. So I think first and foremost, those 12 students, in my opinion, they're heroes in anybody's book.
I think the whole process that we went through to get to the point we are today, it was necessary, it was good, and I'm glad it happened. And if I had anything to do with it, I would do it all over again. I would definitely be involved. And I would want to actually stay and continue the process. And I'm very, very proud of the ones who did stay and graduate, my friends from the class who really stayed at Clinton. I really admire them tremendously.
Had it not been for Clinton, I think, now this is my opinion, I think that Little Rock, all these other little places would not have been integrated. I think if we failed, it would have been all over.
We don't want to forget that history. 2 generations have come and gone, and it's not being taught, it's not being talked about, it's not being shown. Many things are being lost, and this is a historical thing that happened in our city, and we need to continue on so that people can hear it and see it and know what happened in our city.
When you look at the whole story and the broad picture, it sets Clinton apart from other communities. I'm sure there were other communities like that in the South, but the Clinton story is truly an all-American story that not only the people of Clinton can be proud of, but people nationwide.